We're talking to Dr. LMadu, and he's talking about some of the current political and economic situations and conditions on the continent of Africa. And Dr. LMadu, as I might say, that the things are really looking good and looking up for Africa, especially when we think about the Africa that we've talked about on this show over the last 8 or 10 years. And so let's talk about some of the economies and some of the other things that you think are important.
Well, like I've said, the economies are improving. And because the economies are improving, one might ask, what's the reason? You know, why has it been so backwards previously? One of the reasons is because of the process of democratization. You know, the winds of change are blowing in Africa now. Before, prior to this time, most elections in Africa are won by the presidents with 99.9%, as if nobody hates them in the whole country. I remember a long time ago, Hufwebwanyi in the Ivory Coast. Yeah, he won an election with 99.9%. So when they announced it on the radio, he wasn't satisfied. He said, no, they should change it to 100%. So nobody has any idea that somebody hates Hufwebwanyi in the Ivory Coast. Okay. So most of them were winning 99.9% and nobody said anything. Now it has changed. You know, even though we still have people who manipulate the elections, but still there are some, you know, elements that make sure that those elections are not thoroughly rigged. This year there has been about 8, 9 elections in Africa as a whole. Previously, before, you hardly had any, because the whole country was governed by the military.
Just the fact of having an election means something.
It means a whole lot, because it gives people the power to decide who governs them, not by somebody who shot themselves into power by the barrel of the gun. In Rwanda, you know, they had an election this year which returned President Kagame to power. However, the election was not considered fair, free and fair. The main opposition leader, Ms. Agnes Ngabare, who came in to run, was detained and not allowed to run against Kagame. The main reason really is that she is Hutu. Now, in Rwanda, Hutus are still the predominant population. They are about 85% of the population. Kagame is Tutsi. So if he had allowed a Hutu to run, he would have lost in any fair, free and fair election, because majority of the Hutus would have voted for the Hutu, you know, candidate. In most places in Africa, people vote, you know, with their tribes, if necessary. So generally, Kagame would have lost, and he didn't want that to happen. So he won anyway, you know, in the election. In Burundi, you have President Nkurunziza, who was running for another term of office. All his opponents withdrew, you know, so he ran by himself because they were scared that they would be killed. They were intimidated. So Nkurunziza was returned, you know, to power, you know, unopposed. In Tanzania, you know, a few days ago, or a week ago, President Kikwete, you know, was re-elected, you know, for a second term in office. The election was free, clean, and fair. He won by 67.3%. His party, you know, was the party founded by President Nyerere, you know, the Chama Pinduzi. It has been in power since independence. You know, so Kikwete was returned, you know, to power as president. In Ivory Coast, that's where you have the most interesting election in Africa. The first runoff was, the first ballots were cast on the 31st. 3 candidates, you know, emerged. You know, you have the current president, Laurent Gbagbo. Then you have Alassane Ouattara. He was the former vice president of the World Bank. And former president Konan Bedie. So out of 3 of them, 2 will have a runoff on November 30th. Laurent Gbagbo, who is the president, and Alassane Ouattara. The interesting thing is that in the last elections, about 8 years ago, the guy who ran third this time was President Konan Bedie. He was challenged by Ouattara. But guess what? He said, no, Ouattara is not a citizen of Ivory Coast and he can't run for election. Okay? Yeah, but Ouattara was prime minister under Hufwebwanyi for at least 3 years.
And now he can't run for election.
Exactly. Now he's not a citizen of the country, so he can't run. Okay? That action by Bedie precipitated the current crisis in Ivory Coast, because what happened was Ouattara is from the northern part of the country. And then the citizens of Ivory Coast who come from the north have had grievances that they were being discriminated against. So when Ouattara was disallowed, from running, now the army came in, overthrew Bédier. What happened? A few years later, then the guys from the north rebelled, and Ivory Coast is split into two today.
And today, just because of that?
Just because of that, mistake Bédier made. You see, Houphouët-Boigny spent all these years building a prosperous country, and Bédier destroyed it in a few months just to stay in power by trying to disenfranchise Ouattara. So ironically now, Ouattara is running against Gbagbo, for the presidency. So November 30th will be crucial. Most observers have to say two things will happen. If Ouattara loses, there might be riots. The North will not believe he lost fairly. Now the country might stay divided. Those controlling might not, want to have reintegration. If Gbagbo loses, there's this thing that the army will not allow Ouattara to take power. So it will be interesting to see what happens on November 30th. Guinea has some problems now. The elections that were held, a few days ago, a week ago, was won by a guy called Alpha Condé. Now, the supporters of the opposition, of the opposition leader, Mr. Diallo, refused to accept the elections as free and fair. So now there are rioting and demonstrations in Guinea, and the army has declared a state of emergency, in the country because of it. This is the first democratic elections in Guinea's history since independence, because the first president, Sekou Touré, was a dictator, never allowed any elections. When he died, General Lansana Conté took over and imposed a dictatorship too, no elections. When Conté died, a few days later, a lieutenant took over power. And that's how they came to,
to an election now.
Exactly, to where they are now. So this election is very crucial for the country, But now the people refuse to accept the person who was elected. And the voting was based on ethnicity. The guy who won comes from an ethnic group called the Malinke. The one who lost comes from a group called the Pio. And the Pios complain they've never been president of Guinea before, and they want their own person to be president.
Dr. Du, we're getting ready for this second commercial break, and then we'll come back and we'll delve deeper into this political intrigue in a real sense that somehow it's leaving Africa rather than staying around. And of course, we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. The topic is current